Good evening, everyone. So today my topic of discussion is different techniques of PVD induction and principle of PVD induction. So to start with, as you all know that PVD induction is a very crucial step in vitreoretinal surgeries, and usually we commonly apply that conventional technique with active aspiration at the peripapillary region, which is most commonly employed in most of the cases for PVD induction in VR surgeries. However, in adherent posterior hyaloid and where hyaloid is very taut, especially in children and young adults, this PVD induction can be a really challenging task for the surgeon to perform. However, the complete removal of the posterior hyaloid is an important goal in VR surgery, especially in case of vitreoretinal interfaces like a disease like macular hole, epiretinal membrane, vitreomacular traction syndrome, and also in proliferative diabetic retinopathy with traction detachment of retina. So before going to the PVD induction techniques and principle, I will just highlight about the few basic anatomy of the vitreous, the more importance to the posterior vitreous cortex, because we're dealing with the PVD induction, so we should have an idea of a posterior hyaloid phase and vitreoretinal interface with OCT correlation. Then we'll discuss about the stages of PVD and as well as applied aspects in relation to that. So coming to that diagram of the basic anatomy of the vitreous, I will not go to the details of vitreous anatomy, but as you can see in this diagram, so the pink color structure you can see here in the posterior segment is a secondary vitreous, whereas that canal-like structure which is going in between in the intervening space, it is that Cloquet canal which represents the primary vitreous where the hyaloid artery is to be. And this Cloquet canal has anterior posterior extension. Anteriorly, it gets connected to that potential space in the retrolental space. You can see the cursor here. It's called the Burgess space or the space of Uglet. And down posteriorly, it opens up into the optic disc area and the preoptic area with the extension called area of Mertigere. And if you see the zoomed structure, there are also few other potential space. You can see here that there is a potential space between the anterior hyaloid lamina and the ciliary zonules, which is called the canal of Petit. And here it's that attachment of the anterior vitreous to the posterior surface of the lens in the form of a ligament, which is called Weger's ligament or hyaloidocapsular ligament, after the name of the discoverer. So with this basic information, as you know, the vitreous is a 4 ml in volume, and it contains about 98% of water and 2% of structural proteins, mostly the collagen type 2, along with other extracellular matrix. So the vitreous usually gets attached to the retina, but here there are certain points in the retina where the vitreous is strongly adhered, particularly in that vitreous base, where you can see that at the junction of pars plana and pars plicator, the extension here shows the vitreous base at the optic disc, at the macula, and also the blood vessels where the vitreous is very strongly adhered. This is important in relation to surgical maneuver. We should know that where the vitreous adhesions are most strong. So just a basic description of the vitreous anatomy. There are two well accepted published literature in respect to vitreous anatomy. First is the lamellar structure provided by G. Aina, where he studied in various postmortem eyes, and he came to the conclusion that the vitreous body actually is composed of various lamellar-like structure, which is nothing but a collagen fibrils, and he described that lamellae as a tracts. So basically he has identified 4 tracts that run in the vitreous body anterior posteriorly. So here in the structure you can see the first is that tractus retrolentalis or tractus hyaloidus, which basically gets inserted into that retrolental space into the Weger's ligament. Then finally we have that tractus coronarius, which get inserted into that posterior border of the pars plicata. And tractus medianus, where you can have that insertion at that pars plana. Last is the tractus preretinalis, which get inserted into the ora serrata. That is the lamellar structure of the vitreous provided by G. Aina. Similarly, there's another landmark study done by J.F. Wurst, who has given us that concept of cisternal anatomy of the vitreous. So, because of that high water content of the vitreous, it is very difficult to have a histopathological section. So, they have studied it under transmission electron microscopy. So, in the postmortem eyes, basically Dr. Wurst has injected Indian ink in various sections of the vitreous, like anterior to hyaloid, anterior to the optic nerve, into the vitreous body, to see how the ink is behaving. And he found that the ink is getting adhered to the lamellar structure, what Dr. Aina has discussed, but there are certain spaces which gets filled up with the ink around that lamellar structure, which he described as a cistern-like spaces. And he had identified the cistern-like spaces all around that circumferentially surrounding the posterior central vitreous. So to know that central vitreous is a more liquefied structure and the peripheral vitreous is more solid, consisting of more vitreous fibers. So depending upon the anatomical location, he has described this into three regions. So number 4, you can see just behind the ciliary process, you get the retrociliary cisternal ring. Number 5 is at the equator, which is called the equatorial cisternal ring. And number 7 is just in front of the macula. So he described as a perimacular cisternal ring. And it was Dr. Wurst who described another potential space just above the macula lutea, what he described as a bursa premacularis. So I'll be coming to that concept in the subsequent slide, bursa premacularis. So having known about the basic anatomy of the vitreous, so it is very important that to know how the posterior vitreous cortex is oriented in the retinal structure, how the structure is related to each other, and because this is important in relation to the PVD induction, what we're going to discuss in the surgical videos. So if you see here in the SSOCT picture, in the horizontal scan, so you can see a hyporeflective space just above the retina and the macula and the optic disc with the elevated outer edges. So this is represented by the letter P, which is nothing but the bursa premacularis, or it is also called as a precortical vitreous pocket. And it is separated by the help of, it lets the retina and the macula separated with the help of vitreous gel, and intervening is the premacular bursa. So if you see that the posterior cortex is a very thin layer adherent to the internal limiting membrane of the retina here. It is around just 100 to 110 micron, and it gets adhered to the underlying internal lamina of the limiting membrane of the retina with the help of various glycoproteins called fibronectin and laminin. So this is C, represents the vitreous cortex. We can see that another space just above the optic disc represented by M, which is nothing but extension of the Cloquet's canal, that is in the area of Mertegen you are talking about. And there is a septum-like structure separating the two pockets, that is a Cloquet canal and the premacular bursa. But still there is a connection you can see, which connects the two pockets, which is called a connecting channel. So there is definitely a connection between the premacularis bursa and the Cloquet's canal. If you see the vertical scan, you can further see that the pocket with the white arrow is extending beyond the arcade also. And the yellow lines, they basically represents the attachment of the vitreous cortex, where the vitreous fibers are inserted perpendicularly to the retinal surface, and they get adhered to the retinal surface with the help of glycoproteins like laminin, fibronectin we have mentioned. So the vitreous pocket on average width is around 6.4 millimeter, then average thickness is around 0.7 from the fovea. So with the concept of premacular bursa, most of that there is a debate like thing like people of the idea was the premacular bursa or vitreous pocket is a age-related liquefaction of the vitreous. But with the evaluation of the SSOCT in 2012, there has been various studies regarding age-related changes, and they have studied into various age groups where they found that this pocket was not visible in a child below 2 years of age, and it was visible in every children beyond 10 years of age. So it basically starts forming between 3 to 9 or 10 years of age. Here in the diagram, as you see, by Kishi et al., and 2 years of age, we are not able to see any pocket premacular bursa or any pocket developing. But you can see a fine ridge-like structure with a black arrow in a 3-year-old girl. And then an 8-year-old boy, you can see the pocket start forming. You can see the septum, you can see the area of Mertegani. And in 13 year, you can see a well-developed premacular bursa with a connecting channel also, along with the septum. And in 30 and 54 years, it is fully well developed. So this connecting channel also starts developing after 5 years of age. So it is nothing but a anatomical space. It is not a age-related changes. It is an anatomical space which starts evolving with the embryological process in early childhood. So when after knowing that concept, so this is a schematic diagram showing how the premacular bursa is connected to the Clockett's channel. This triangle is showing that connection with the Clockett's canal. The asterisk is showing that the premacular bursa, and they basically move anteriorly through the tractus hyaloides, or you can get the Clockett canal, and finally to end up in the retrolental space, which is denoted by the letter O. There is also various studies where they try to measure the volumetric measurement with the SSOCT. They have a 3D vitreous imaging technique, and they found that approximately the bursa premacular is measured around 6.84 microliter. An area of Mertigani is around 3.06 microliter. So coming to the stages of PVD, as you see in the picture A, you can see the whole full-fledged premacular bursa. You can see that foveal architecture intact. You can see the septum, but you didn't see a line separating between that. So there is actually no PVD in figure A in stage 0. While in figure B in stage 1, you can see a particular line which is getting separating from the retina in the macular region, but still it is attached to the fovea, which is called a paramacular PVD. In figures C, you can always see that macular PVD has evolved further, but still there is a foveal attachment of the vitreous cortex, which is causing a perifoveal PVD in stage 2. Then you move to the stage 3 when you see that the whole of the PVD is separated from the macula and the fovea as well, but still there is a connection of the optic disc. So they regard it as stage 3, but they further divide it into stage 3A and stage 3B, depending upon the intact precortical pocket. So if you see that the line underlying that, it is a fully intact line separated from the underlying retina. So the vitreofoveal separation with the intact precortical line, they regard it as a stage 3A. And in the stage 3B, everything is the same. Only thing is there is a breach in the continuity in the line in the figure E. So vitreofoveal separation with a disrupted posterior wall. Still there is attachment to the optic nerve. They consider it as a stage 3B. Last is the stage 4, where you can see a complete PVD when the vitreous is completely detached from the fovea, macula, and as well as the optic disc. So having understand that how the PVD happens, so you know there is another term called anomalous PVD. So when usually the PVD will occur when there is a adequate amount of vitreous liquefaction, as well as there is a vitreoretinal dehiscence. But when there is a vitreous liquefaction, but the vitreoretinal dehiscence is not weak enough, it results into anomalous PVD, which can cause traction to the retina. So let's see how it will lead to various vitreoretinal diseases. So first you can see that in case of anomalous PVD, there can be an entity called vitreoschizis. When the posterior cortex, there will be split in the posterior cortex, and it will split into 2 layers. So like in the OCT you're seeing it is split, but you can also see a membrane lying just above the retina. So it can form a premacular membrane because the leftover residual vitreous cortex will eventually cause cellular proliferation and development of premacular membrane. So in that case, so it can cause tangential traction. So one thing to mention here is when the split occurs in the posterior vitreous cortex, we always know that there are single layer of cells lining the posterior vitreous cortex. These are called hyocytes, which are mononuclear cells. They are capable of synthesizing collagen. They are capable of contractile property. So if the split happens posterior to the hyocyte in the posterior vitreous cortex, as well as there is a vitreopapillary adhesion, which will cause the force centrifugal traction, that is, it will cause the vector to pull towards the disc. So split posterior to hyocytes with vitreopapillary adhesion will generate a centrifugal traction, finally leading up to an entity called macular hole formation. But if the split is anterior to the hyocytes, so the hyocytes will be left over, that means it will leave behind a thick hypercellular membrane just above the surface of the retina. Plus, if there is no vitreopapillary adhesion, so this membrane will ultimately cause centripetal traction, that is towards the fovea, because there is no vector to pull it in the direction of the optic nerve. So finally, it will lead to cellular proliferation and epiretinal membrane formation with a tangential traction causing a macular pucker-like situation. In the second arm, where there is an anomalous PVT, but PVT is completed in the mean that full thickness vitreous is separated, but PVT is partial. That means in certain parts, the PVT is still yet to evolve. Like you see in the diagram that PVT is full thickness, but still there is a perifoveal attachment with a traction. So if there is a peripheral separation and a posterior adhesion, it may lead to an axial traction. Finally, it may lead to either vitreomacular adhesion or traction, or it may lead to an entity called vitreomacular traction. On the other arm, there can be posterior separation, but peripherally it can cause a traction when the PVT is partial, which will ultimately lead to pathology like retinal tears or eventually retinal detachment. So this is how anomalous PVT can lead to various vitreoretinal interface diseases and complication. So often we encounter this entity called Irving-Guest syndrome or pharmacotoxic CME, but we don't have an idea that how the cataract surgery will incite a CME in the macula. Similarly, how a drug and applied in the over the corneal surface for anterior chamber penetration, it can cause CME in the macula. We often don't know how the communication happening between the anterior chamber and the macula. So basically, as per the anatomy we have described so far, so definitely there is also various hypothesis and established fact that this aqueous humor also drains into the retrolental space, and through this space it gets access to the Cloquet's canal through the Berger space, and then it eventually drains into the area of Murtiglian through that connecting channel what I have described in the anatomy before. It gets access to the premacular bursa area just above the macula. So all the biochemical mediators and the inflammatory mediators will eventually drain along with the aqueous humor into the premacularis bursa and can cause this CME to happen. So now we come to the various techniques of PVT induction. To start, it is a conventional technique where you pull with the active suction with the cutter. Then you have a technique of using IVTA or dye, PVT induction using a MVR or PIC, using forceps, enzymatic or pharmacological vitreolysis, PVT induction using LPFC bubble and hydrodissection technique. So let's see, we'll discuss it one by one. So to start with, we have a PVT induction in a full thickness macular hole. It's in pediatric patient. So where we have just tried to induce the PVT with a conventional technique. So here you can see with the cutter, at the peripapillary area, active suction is done. Just to start with, just before induction, you have to complete the core vitrectomy and the peripheral vitreous separation. Then you have to proceed to the posterior pole and start the active aspiration for the PVT induction. So once you see that the cutter is trying to lift the posterior hyaloid, and you can see the wave is forming here, indicating the extent of vitreous separation, and this maneuver is repeated in all directions to ensure that the PVT is being lifted from all directions. You can see the peripheral wave here where the PVT is induced and separated. Coming to the second technique where process is same, but where the IVTA was used just for the visualization of the posterior vitreous in case the vitreous is adherent and we are in doubt. So you can see after injection of the IVTA, the cutter is being used for the active aspiration to lift the posterior vitreous, and you can see opening has been made here, just like a whiz ring. When you're trying to pull the active aspiration in the anterior direction to lift the vitreous. Now you can see it is lifting up, and now it is just on the verge of separation, and now it is lifted. So after the completion of the induction, we are ensured that the PVT is induced. Then you can go ahead with the vitrectomy for removal of the vitreous. So this is another case, the 20 gauge vitrectomy, where the PDR case where the vitreous was very adherent. It was not amenable to induce by a cutter. So you tried with the cutter, it was not coming. Then MVR blade was used. You can see the MVR blade is used here to just to give a nick to make an opening in the posterior hyaloid. And once the opening is made with the MVR blade, we are using a vertical scissor to lift the hyaloid face and just cutting the hyaloid just to get the plane. You can see the leaf over that face also. So here we have done the PVD induction. The surgeon has performed the PVD induction with the MVR plate. So PVD induction in different scenarios, like in pediatric vitreoretinopathies, in detached retina, diabetic vitrectomies, high myopes and macular hole, like we have shown in the previous slides. So coming to the pediatric cases, why the pediatric cases are really different from an adult one? So because the vitreous gel is much denser in children and the attachment of the posterior hyaloid is much stronger than adults. Secondly, the PVR changes is observed more frequently than adults in children and often you found at a very higher degrees of PVR, grade C or more. Inadequate clearance of the vitreous acts as a scaffold for proliferative changes, which may result into redetachments. Last is the amblyopia management. Even if the surgeon has done a nice and clean job, if you don't manage the amblyopia thing, the ultimate target of visual improvement will be in vain. So these are the challenges where you start facing with the pediatric cases. So here is a case with a pediatric retinal detachment. The surgeon is trying to induce the PVD with the help of an IVTA, a detached retina. So IVTA is injected. So with the help of cutter, active aspiration is done. You can see the separation. You can see the retina is getting pulled along with the traction. And once the traction is relieved, the retina is falling back, which indicates that PVD is separated. So separate, similar maneuver, I'm applying it again. So similar maneuver is repeated in the other direction also to make sure that vitreous gets separated from all around the posterior pole and surrounding retina. So here IVT helps in the visualization of the posterior vitreous also. So this another situation in a pediatric detachment where the vitreous is very adherent and it is not amenable to the suction with the PVD induction with the active suction with the cutter. So after IVT staining, we tried with the cutter, but it was not amenable. So forceps was used actually literally to peel the vitreous sheet from the detached membrane, just like a membrane peeling in diabetics. You can see how the forceps is used to lift the vitreous in each and every quadrant to peel it. So coming to another condition where there is a pediatric retinal detachment in a coloboma RD. So you can see the coloboma here, and with the cutter after the pole vitrectomy, the surgeon is trying to induce the PVD at the edge of the coloboma. Vitreous is not very visible here, but with the help of active aspiration, you can see the retina is also getting pulled with the cutter, giving a hint that the vitreous is adherent, and the movement is falling back. This means the PVD is separated. So the same maneuver is tried in all other quadrants to make sure the vitreous is separated from the underlying retina. See, the same thing is repeated in each and every direction. The anterior pull, we're trying to lift the vitreous from the underlying retina, and once you're sure that PVD is induced, you can remove the vitreous with the cutter. So this is a similar scenario, but in this case, you have used the surgeon has used IVTA to stain the vitreous. Technique is all the same, principle is all the same, but this IVTA will give a better visualization of the posterior vitreous hyaloid face, so that you can see the plane of separation and leftover vitreous. Accordingly, the surgeon can induce the PVD in the adherent areas. You can see here the vitreous is lifted off with the active aspiration. So here you see, with the help during the process of active aspiration, even the retinas get sucked with into the cutter. So with the help of a light pipe, the surgeon has to manage to separate the retina from the cutter and to complete the rest of the vitrectomy with a PVD induction. So IVTA usually makes simpler in the sense that visualization becomes better, but the technique and everything remains the same. So it is another entity that in child with retinoschisis with the retinal detachment, where the surgeon, with the help of active aspiration and active suction, trying to lift that hyaloid from the disc, causing the PVD induction. It's a very short video just to show that how the PVD induction is attempted in the case of retinoschisis with retinal detachment. So coming to diabetic vitrectomies. So how diabetic vitrectomies are unique? So basically there is no complete PVD in diabetic cases. You often get a ring-like proliferation. So in the diagram you can see that ring-like proliferation always you see around the arcade to start with. If you recall that same concept of premacular bursa, so that is the fibrovascular proliferation or whatever the fibrosis is developing in the diabetic pediatric eyes, they actually grow around the outer margin of the precortical vitreous or the premacular bursa. It acts as a scaffold. So they go all around in a ring-like fashion, and once they have they are getting the adequate support, then they start moving towards the fovea with a foveal traction or detachment. Initially, is always a ring-like proliferation to start to. However, any other bleeding in that disc in the neovascular area also, it will eventually seep into the precortical vitreous space because there is a eventual connection between the two. Second, the hyaloid is always taught. There is never a complete PVD. Even there is a PVD, there is a vitreoschisis, which almost always there in diabetic cases. It's remain adherent to the posterior pole. So there is one of the features of a diabetic cases that is called diabetic vitreopathy. Also, along with anterior posterior traction, what the PVT will impart, there is also a tangential traction component, which eventually will be generated by the fibrovascular proliferation around the arcade, what you have seen. These will also cause additional tangential traction. So, two types of traction is working in the diabetic TRDs. Last is the combined retinal detachment. When there is excessive traction, it can create a break at the site of maximum traction or near the CR if it is lasered. So here in this case, you can see a small break at the outer, infratemporal quadrant in a diabetic TRD, so resulting into a combined retinal configuration. So how vitrectomy basically helps in diabetic retinopathy? Number one, it will release the traction. So traction release is the one goal. Second, after vitrectomy, there is definitely increase in the vitreal oxygen level, so the exchange of oxygen is better. Then in all the proliferative diseases, there are various growth factors, VEGF, interleukin 6, PDF, protective growth factor, which eventually are increased in surplus amount, and these will ultimately lead to vasopermeability and vascular leakage and diabetic macular edema to increase. So vitrectomy ensures the mechanical removal of these growth factors also, and helps in reconstitution of the blood-brain barrier, which was disrupted because of all the traction and also inflammatory mediators. So this explains, even if there is no traction in diabetic PDR, no tractional detachment, even for DME, recalcitrant DME, vitrectomy can help in resolution of the DME by this mechanism. So coming to PVD induction in a diabetic TRD case, after doing the core vitrectomy, the peripheral vitreous is removed. So here you see that the surgeon is trying to induce a flat prolif with a posterior hyaloid in the posterior pole. Here you can see the cutter. And with the help of active aspiration, they are trying to just lift the hyaloid along with the prolif very smoothly and steadily. And you can see all the periretinal blood. So now the hyaloid is lifted partially. Surgeon is trying to trim the peripheral attachments to lift, and now it is again with the active aspiration. So you can see that now the hyaloid is being lifted, and once you assure that the hyaloid is lifted, now the surgeon can perform with the vitrectomy and complete the rest of the PVD induction. So in the same case, after the PVD induction, yet there was a prolif which was flat, which was in the nasal retina and was not amenable to lift it in single go. So you can see here there is a fine attachment. The surgeon is trying to just lift the hyaloid and at the same time trimming the attachments to the surrounding retina so that we are able to lift the flat prolif nasal to the disc. And we're trimming that vitreous and with the help of aspiration also trying to lift the hyaloid. It's a flat prolif. There is another case where there is a diabetic, there is a taut posterior tuck and hyaloid at the posterior pole, and who just eventually try to remove with the help of a forceps. You can see the forceps, it just grabs the posterior hyaloid and trying to lift it. We're trying to lift it here. And it's lift here and just trying to pull it in the anterior direction gently just to create the separation of the PVD. That is another case when PVD induction is attempted in a case of combined retinal detachment. It is a old RD, chronic RD actually, with all that. You can see all the subretinal bands extending, and surgeon is trying to induce a PVD with active aspiration in the peripheral retina. So you're aspirating and just removing the vitreous, aspirating and cutting it off. You can see how the cutter is moving, trying to remove the adherent vitreous from various places. So the pull is gently the pull towards the anterior direction so that you can lift the vitreous and then you can trim it off. So in this way, in every quadrant, this was attempted to raise the vitreous in PVD induction to the extent possible. So it's another case where there is a vitreous hemorrhage. MVR blade was used to separate that posterior hyaloid. So you can see it's a lot of subhyaloid hemorrhage underneath the hyaloid face, and with the help of a MVR blade, the surgeon is trying to create an entry to the posterior hyaloid face. It's trying to poke inside, trying to introduce the tip of the needle, tip of the MVR blade. And once surgeon is able to make an opening, you can see that the subhyaloid heme they released into the vitreous cavity. So the plane is now being easily accessible with the MVR blade. Once the surgeon is sure that we are in the subhyaloid space, that we can lift the posterior hyaloid, then a gentle pull is being created to lift the hyaloid face, and while doing so, you can see the entire thing along with the subhyaloid heme, along with the hyaloid is lifted off. It's a little risky because it can also cause iatrogenic breaks, but luckily it was not there in this case. So once the entire thing is lifted off, the next is to just remove the entire posterior hyaloid and the subhyaloid heme with the help of a cutter and trim it off. So coming to another case of a vitreous hemorrhage, where just with the basis of simple vitrectomy after the peripheral truncation, with the help of active suction, the surgeon was able to induce the PVD. You can see the pre-retinal heme, the entire posterior hyaloid get lifted off with the suction only, and then the rest things becomes easy for doing a manipulation. And you can see after the vitrectomy, that's all the hemorrhages are cleared. There's a peripheral laser scar marks. The media is clear right now. The entire PVD is being induced. So only active suction can sometimes be helpful to create the PVD if there is no other traction component. So there is another case of a old vitreous hemorrhage, not a fresh one. And you can see the color is very turbid and very not a very fresh heme-like. So the surgeon is performing the peripheral truncation with the cutter in the periphery to remove as much as the peripheral vitreous. There you can see the movement of the cutter. So once the peripheral truncation and peripheral vitrectomy is completed, now we come to the posterior pole. We are trying to separate the hyaloid phase, the trimming of the adherent hyaloid at the posterior pole. You can see that the cutter is trying to just trim the vitreous to the extent possible. It's trying to lift it off to get the plane, but there is adhesion superiorly, so the surgeon is trying to trim the vitreous in the superior extension also to get the plane. And once we are able to get the plane, so now once we're sure that that surrounding attachment has been trimmed off, now we can gently, with active aspiration, can lift the hyaloid from the posterior pole like that. See that. Now even the disc can be seen. A lot of pre-retinal deep hemoglobin blood in the posterior pole. And also, now the entire thing is in the mid-vitreous cavity with the posterior hyaloid in the prolif. Now you can easily trim and cut off and remove the vitreous with the vitrectomy cutter. You can also see some laser marks in the periphery in the septal area. So it could be a vascular occlusion sequelae also. So coming to high myopia, what are the facts to know and how the myopia is different in its entity? So you often have this configuration like picture in myopic eyes, if you do assess velocity. First thing is that complete PVD occurs very early in high myopia because the vitreous liquefaction sets in early compared to the age-related process. Vitreous crisis is a very frequent observation in myopic eyes. Sometimes it will have a complete PVD but with a residual vitreous cortex to left behind. So what you see in the OCT is a myopic schisis, or you can say myopic maculopathy or foveoschisis, which is observed even when the complete PVD is there with no residual cortex. Still you can see that myopic foveoschisis. That means when there is no anterior traction, still you can have that stretching of the retina. So how it is possible? It's because of the rigid ILM, because myopic eyes also have a posterior staphyloma. ILM is rigid in the posterior pole, so this, even if there is complete PVD, the staphyloma will just try to create a posterior traction and stretching the retina downwards. So to resist it, the ILM will try to resist the traction, and in counter traction and traction, it will eventually result into stretching of the retina, causing a foveoschisis or a schitic change. That explains how vitrectomy with the ILM peeling helps in the resolution of foveoschisis. Also, we see Ardith macular hole more commonly in myopic eyes. So once you can lift the ILM peeling, you can do the ILM peeling so the counter traction will not be there. So eventually it will help in resolution of the foveoschisis. So here I am showing a video of a myopic eye with attached retina with the foveoschisis. So the surgeon is first trying to induce the PVD after staining the vitreous complete in the core vitrectomy with the IVTA. So we're trying to induce the PVD. You can see the movement of the cutter, just the peripapillary region with active aspiration. You can see that trying to lift the vitreous posterior hyaloid from there. Now in the arcues, you can see that clear line of thin membrane of posterior hyaloid is lifting off, and with the anterior pull, the whole thing is coming off. Now you can see the IVT crystals very clearly. And once you ensure that the PVD is lifted off, then you can just trim and remove the vitreous with the help of a cutter. So the entire vitreous PVD is trimmed off. But as I have told, in myopic eyes, vitreoschisis is a very frequent observation or very frequent thing. So you should not be convinced once your PVD induction is completed. So the surgeon is again restaining the eye with the IVTA to find if there is any other residual membrane. And to the surprise, residual membrane is also found there. So the surgeon is trying to lift it with the active aspiration, going very close to the retina. You can see how close to the retina the cutter is. So vitreoschisis in the first layer is there. And IVTA generally will help in identification of the membrane. So now you can see that the active aspiration, you can see here the thin membrane, you can see my cursor, the thin membrane is lifting off. Yes, now you can see the thin membrane lifting off. And you have trimmed the residual vitreous there. Second time again the IVT, third time actually the IVT was re-injected to find any other residual membrane was there or not. And till this time also there was a island of entrant hyaloid actually just around the macula was found. So, surgeon is trying to remove that residual island of its posterior hyaloid that was adherent to the posterior pole in spite of doing it for 2 times. So now you can see the thin membrane here. After the surgeon is convinced that the vitrectomy and PVD induction is completed, then we proceed with the ILM peeling. So we stay into the PVG, and with the help of a forceps, we're just trying to lift the ILM, we're grasping the ILM, and just take a rhexis, just like we do in a cataract surgery. We're trying to complete the ILM peeling. So this ILM peeling also ensures complete removal of the posterior vitreous cortex, number one. Number two, it also helps in releasing the counter traction in a myopic eyes. So you can see how the ILM is gripped to the forceps, the ILM forceps. Now gently it is trying, surgeon is trying to roll it. Now the ILM peeling is completed. So, yes, we say that ILM peeling with a good vitrectomy will definitely ensure a successful outcome. So here is a key to it. So now whatever processes are like whatever induction methods we have shown, let's have a quick look, maybe brushing of that techniques. So it is a case of a myopic eye with a macular hole where surgeon is trying to induce with the cutter with the active suction in the peripapillary area, and now you can see the Weiss ring-like structure developing, and yeah, now you can see the opening there. So this is the opening like Weiss ring. Second, that we've shown like in IVTA case when PVD induction was tried with screening with IVT, and you can see that Weiss ring developing and creating a vitropapillary opening and trying to lift it anteriorly, separating the hyaloid. Third is that the case of ovovioschisis, just now we have seen. So you have to repeatedly do the maneuver to complete the vitrectomy and PVD induction in such cases. This is the case of retinoschisis with active suction at the posterior pole of the disc to have the PVD induction. This is the coloboma eye, but there was no PVD, and surgeon was trying to induce the PVD with active aspiration over the detached retina. This is the case of a pediatric retinal detachment with the adherent hyaloid, where forceps was used to peel the posterior hyaloid actually. So last is a case of the ARN, where is inflammatory pathology. The vitreous is very sticky and adherent, and forceps was used to literally peel, just like the previous case, to complete the PVD induction. So coming to pharmacological vitreolysis. So its concept was that enzymatic vitreolysis was introduced to the concept that it will be able to induce a PVD without a surgical manipulation and without any surgical complication too. So for that they have tried various enzyme like chondroitinase, hyaluronidase to have that effect, but mostly the plasmin was used initially with autologous plasmin to have that PVD induction, especially in VMT eyes or in macular hole or eyes with the pediatric eyes where there's the adherent hyaloid. But the problem with plasmin was that the plasmin has to be processed in the laboratory from the autologous sample. So first you have to centrifuge, then you have to separate the plasma, then you have to extract the plasminogen with the help of a chromatography, then convert the plasminogen to plasmin with the help of streptokinase, and then you get the activated plasmin. After all this tussle, when you get the activated plasmin, it's a very unstable compound. So it has to be used within few hours of preparation. So that was the hurdles to face with. So again, the peak action is within 15 to 30 minutes. So you cannot let it off for a long time. So to combat with such a problem, they came out with a microplasmin or recombinant product, what you call in the form of ochriplasmin in the name of Jetria. So it is basically a recombinant product of the plasmin enzyme, and it is given intravitreally maybe 30 minutes before that vitrectomy in a dose of 0.1 to 5 milligram. Basically, how they act is they hydrolyzes that adhesive glycoproteins like laminin and fibronectin, and by hydrolyzing it, they will weaken the vitreoretinal adhesion, causing a dehiscence and induce the PVD in eyes. So it got its first FDA approval because ochriplasmin is a much stable compound than plasmin. It doesn't require much stringent condition for storage and all. So, 2012, they got their FDA approval for VMT after a large trial of BB Trust trial. It is phase 2, phase 3 trials, and 2 large trials was done. So, from that trial, actually, they're seeing that with ochriplasmin and without ochriplasmin, they were able to induce a resolution of VMT in 26% of the cases in the ochriplasmin arm, whereas in placebo, it was 10%. Although it was more in the ochriplasmin arm, but it was not that significant. But what they have seen in this subset of patients, they have set in this criteria that ochriplasmin was able to induce more successfully the PVD induction without any complication. So these are the criteria set by MIVIT Trust phase 3 clinical trial. There is a foveal adhesion of less than 1500 micron, absence of epiretinal membrane, presence of a full thickness macular hole, younger patient less than 65 years of age, and a phakic patient with a female gender. So these are the criteria where the ochriplasmin will mostly effective according to the MIVIT Trust trial. Although it was thought to be a silver bullet to induce that PVD with the surgical manipulation, but it is not commonly used nowadays because of lot of side effects being reported. Apart from photopsia, which is because of the PVD induction, and dyschromatopsia, there is also zonular dehiscence and lens subluxation being reported in cases of phakic eyes. Apart from that, they have a blurring of vision complaints, visual field loss, ellipsoid disruption, subretinal fluid formation. ERG changes is also being documented where the rods and cones both are affected, but rods are more affected in patient sometimes also complains of nyctalopia. So all this comes under the entity called acute ochriplasmin retinopathy. So they have a doubt like the whole ochriplasmin was introduced just to have a vitreoretinal separation or a dehiscence, how it is causing a widespread effect of the retina and all other these complications. So basically, so ochriplasmin is a non-specific serine proteases. So the laminin, what they hydrolyze is the laminin in the vitreoretinal interface. Laminin is also present in the retinal layers, in the outer taxiform, in the external limiting membrane, in the photoreceptor matrix, between the RP and the retinal adhesion, also in the lens ciliary zonules. So as because it is non-specific, they keep on cleaving every peptide bond and every other protein. So it has become a generalist effect for the ochriplasmin rather than restricting its action just on the vitreoretinal interface. So it is all this side effect profile. Now it is rarely used nowadays, although it was initially thought to effectively used in case of pediatric cases also and VMT cases. Coming to a hydrodissection technique, it is also a technique which is just a modification of a conventional technique. It is reported by Sato et al. And other authors also. So what the difference is just once we do a traditional PVT, we just the peripapillary area, we grip the posterior hyaloid, pull the hyaloid anteriorly and try to separate manually. While during this manual lifting, we can create a peripheral traction which can cause retinal tears. How the hydrodissection technique is different. Here they are not attempting the PVD induction at the peripapillary area. Rather, they just try to lift the hyaloid just over the temporal vascular arcade and just try to lift the hyaloid. Once they're able to lift the hyaloid at the active aspiration, they try to create a small opening with the cutter. So once on the verge of opening or lifting also, a small opening is created sometimes. So once the small opening is created, the infusion cannula is always put on. So this fluid will sweep in through this opening, and to make sure that fluid will resect the rest of the vitreous, will separate the rest of the peripheral vitreous from the retina. without additional peripheral traction. It is an indirect way of PVD induction. They call it a hydrodissection technique. Like in the diagram, you're showing that after IVTS training, the surgeon is trying to have active aspiration suction towards that vascular arcade. And in the event of that, a small opening is created. You can see here with the arrows it is marked. And through this opening, this fluid will seep in into the subhilar space and will eventually try to lift the hilar from the surrounding periphery. What they discovered is a hydrodissection technique. There's another technique which is published in IGO last year by Naresh Babu et al. They called it a mega Weisering technique, that is also LPFC existed. So they tried it in a detached retina where they used LPFC to stabilize the posterior pole. So if you see that the technique, how they have achieved the technique. So after they've injected IVTA being strained, the peripheral vitreous to be everything co-vitrectomy has been done. So they've put the LPFC to stabilize the posterior pole. And with the help of a diamond scraper, they're trying to just brush up the posterior hyaloid. You can see they're trying to debride the posterior hyaloid just to make an opening. In every direction, they are trying to repeat the maneuver. So now they're trying it downwards to enlarge the opening they created. So as they have created a large opening, so they call it a mega Weisering because the dimensions are quite bigger than what you see in the Weisering. So once they have achieved that adequate opening, they are lifting the edge of that opening with the help of forceps. And what they are trying to do is they're just trying to push the LPFC through the opening into the subhilar space. So you can see that with gripping the forceps, they're trying to just push the LPFC inside that opening in the subhilar space so that they get a very easy plane of vitreous, PVD induction, and they are able to complete the PVD induction without much hassle. Now they are able to complete the vitrectomy because the LPFC itself is giving a plane of separation. Same maneuver they have also tried without staining IVTA. They have tried with this dye actually. But the procedure is everything is same. It's attached retina. The same, they are stroking the surface to create a opening, and then they are able to lift the hyaloid to create the push the LPFC through the opening. Same maneuver. So it's called a mega Weisering technique. So another surgical technique that tried in a pediatric patients where the vitreous is very adherent with the help of a flexible loop. It's nothing but we call it the Finis loop, what we also have in our operation theater. So you can see a loop here. The margins are serrated and it is retractable. The loop, once we enter inside the posterior segment through the sclerotomy, you can usually open up the loop and you can perform the surgery. So what they have done is the advantage is that it is very flexible, and you can the angulation helps in just keeping that loop over the surface of the retina. It will not create much pressure over the retina, and just with the sweeping movement, we can just keep that posterior hyaloid of the eye lens just scratching to produce a defect to get the plane of cleavage. So what you see here, you can just the black portion, round portion is the optic nerve, and the dotted circle you see nothing but it's a hyaloid, adherent to the surrounding the optic nerve. So with the help of a Finis loop, they're trying to just create a making the opening larger. They're trying in every direction just to create the opening and also to make the opening larger. Once they feel that okay, the opening is quite large enough, they can try to induce the PVD. Once the plane is there, the cleavage plane is there, either with the forceps or with the help of a active aspiration with the help of a cutter. So this all of modification, like in ophthalmology, they try to use the PVD induction with a combined sharp dissection and active aspiration. So they tried with the needle actually. So it's 25 gauge needle, around 32 millimeter in length. Just bend the teeth at a 45 degree angle to create a sharp pointed edge, and they connected that needle with the aspiration, active aspiration port, so that they can also induce PVD with the help of active suction. So they engage that tip in the peripapillary area with the help of the pointed tip. And once they're able to get the plane, just try to lift the posterior hyaloid in the peripapillary area. And once you get the plane, you can give active aspiration also, because it is connected to the aspiration tube, and then you can generate the PVD induction. It's all modification of process. So while we are talking about PVD induction, there are few situations where you really like to think of a PVD induction to go or not, or to try a PVD induction or not. One of the condition is endophthalmitis. So endophthalmitis is a very deadly situation where the retina and everything is very inflamed, is very friable. So once if there is no PVD and you're trying to induce a PVD in such eyes while going for vitrectomy, there is a high chances you can create iatrogenic breaks, you have to put a silicone oil, and the whole things become messy. In such situations, as much vitrectomy is required to clear the vitreous debris is, it is advisable. If wanted, you can always go for the second time, complete the vitrectomy once the inflammation or infection subsides. Another entity in pediatric cases, you see the falciform folds, where you can see in FEVR cases, ROP cases, where if you try to induce the PVD over that folds, sometimes it can cause unadequate traction, bleeding, and sometimes creating a break in the fold, because the vitreous is very adherent there. So once you created a break, it is very difficult to manage, because when laser and everything is difficult to get over the falciform fold. So it is advisable to trim the vitreous rather than trying to induce a PVD over the falciform folds. And this is not a contraindication, not a very SFL cases where obviously the surgeon is able to induce the PVD is well and good. But if you feel that young patient, the PVD is very adherent, and you are trying to put it to the maximum aspiration, 400, 600 more than suction is required. So sometimes you can create additional iatrogenic break in the process. And the whole idea of putting that SFI, because you have to put tamponade, you have to put oil, gas, and that idea of SFI will be in vain. Rather, surgeon should be more able to do a complete vitrectomy near the pars plana, where all the manipulations of a needle or the a needle or haptic or forceps being introduced. That area has to be cleared with the vitreous so that no additional traction happens anteriorly. So PVD induction, if possible, good. Otherwise, you don't have to be very strict every time in SFL cases. So the take-home message is, PVD induction should be initiated in a steady and controlled fashion, with slowly you have to rise the suction pressure to 50, 300, 400, and should not be very jerky movements or very abrupt movements, so it can create a break. Sometimes if the conventional method fails, other techniques you can attempt, but that depends upon what is the clinical scenario, and also it depends upon the ease of the surgeon. If there is a situation when there is a doubtful situation, or if the surgeon is not convinced about the PVD induction, so it is always advisable to use an IVT or a dye to have better visualization and to complete the vitrectomy and PVD induction, especially in myopic eyes, like I have shown in the video. As we have discussed, the good vitrectomy with PVD induction is always ensure a successful outcome and thereby prevent recurrences. Thank you. So this is my acknowledgement.
So Dr. Jayalakshmi had one question for you. At what stage of PVD or how early can patient become symptomatic? So I don't know what exactly she means, well, like a spontaneous PVD or age-related PVD she is talking about. So
Age,
I think she has left already. Is she there? So basically what we talk about is symptomatic PVD and asymptomatic PVD, which normally asymptomatic, but most of the time because of anomalous attachment during separation, that the stuck which is causing during a separation, patient feel that floaters or your rashes, and that is what is she mean. But basically, yeah, it is somewhere generally. I mean, it can be at any stage of PVD wherever you have a tug on the retina. So maybe I will put it that way. It can be just usually sometime only visiting, sometime at the mid periphery or just before a base excision. Sorry, not base excision, just before it reaches the base where you have irregular attachments, and that it's there. It can be symptomatic at that time. But the importance is symptomatic PVD. If you have, there's like almost around 15 to 20% of risk developing some retinal tear during the process of PVD induction.
Yes.
Yeah, Isha wants to know any role of viscoelastic in case of difficult PVD induction.
Well, sir, difficult PVD induction, you can try other techniques, because viscoelastics per se, it doesn't, it's just like to get the plane of separation. So as far as like techniques are concerned, the viscoelastics will not be able to induce the PVD. If you even try to, if you get the plane opening, then you can inject little bit of viscoelastics to get the further separation. But as a technique of induction of PVD, I have a doubt regarding.
Yeah, anybody, any consultants, anybody is having a experience of using viscoelastic to induce the PVD? Ekta, yeah, Parveen, Dhanashri?
No, sir, I don't use viscoelastic for PVD induction.
Sir, it is helpful basically for diabetic membrane dissection, but not that useful for PVD induction.
Chetan?
Yeah, sir. It is, as Dr. Ekta said, it probably has really no role to play, because it doesn't really have that kind of force to create a thing. It itself is a viscous fluid. So it's very unlikely to create an opening where the retina is, the vitreous so adherent to the retina. Also, in cases, I just wanted to tell students who have been inducing the PVD. So you don't have to be belligerent with induction of PVD in all cases. RD I accept. You go on the end point of PVD induction. You go on till you reach either the breaks, the quadrant where the breaks are. Don't try to induce beyond those breaks. Or in other areas where there is firm adhesions, like for example lattices. You don't try to induce PVD beyond lattices in other areas, because you will end up creating more breaks. Also, for example, he just talked about the induction of PVD in cases like SFIL or in macular hole. Again, you induce the PVD, but don't be belligerent. Don't try to be too. You try to induce PVD all the way up to periphery. You must know that as you grow older, the hyaloid, the vitreous base, continues posteriorly to the ora. So there's a lot of asymmetry. A lot of areas the vitreous base is quite posterior up to the equator or even beyond that. So you don't try to induce PVD. And when in the attempt of inducing PVD you see spots of hemorrhages in the periphery, just stop there, because those areas are the areas where you have you should not try to induce PVD beyond that. Those hemorrhages are indications that you have actually induced more traction in the periphery. So those hemorrhages happen because you have probably damaged the vitreous and the vitrovascular adhesions. So just leave it at that point. Beyond that, don't try to induce PVD. Just trim the vitreous beyond those areas up to the ora. So especially in cases where there is no RD, where you are inducing like a macular hole, ERMs, in SFILs. So those cases, just stop where you see these points of hemorrhages. Also, if you don't see anything while during surgery, when you finish your procedures, please look at those peripheral areas, and if you see those hemorrhages, just look at those areas carefully if you have actually induced a small flap. And if you have, then treat it with laser. I just wanted to add these points. That's all.
Shushuvam?
Yes, sir.
Like Sushant has a very practical question. Like, does the amount of core vitrectomy done, like less or more, affect the procedure of PVD induction? I mean, how much vitrectomy you should before you may attempt separating vitreous at the disc?
Yes, sir. Just like that, it's not that you have to do a very good core vitrectomy and leave a very thin rim of vitreous So that little bit amount of vitreous is always advisable to stay around the posterior pole to cause the PVD induction. So how amount if you cannot quantify, but definitely it should not be less. If you do the mid vitreous, you can clear the mid vitreous cavity also, and just around the posterior pole you can leave amount of vitreous so that you get a sufficient plane to work and induce the PVD. But it should not be like sufficient amount of vitreous also should not be left. So core along with peripheral vitrectomy should be completed. Then you can try with that PVD induction at the posterior pole.
Yeah, so basically, to add on more little bit, you need to have just enough vitreous that you should be able to grasp it. Then only you are going to have a grip, and then you'll able to induce, because then only you will be able to exert traction to separate. So do a good vitrectomy, but leave enough that you should be able to grab it, grasp it, so that you have a firm grip to induce the traction. Okay.
Yes.
Pooja wants to know any specific precaution or technique in eyes with morning glory disc related RD, which has a peripapillary ectatic ring of retina where breaks are often noted.
Well, so it will be actually like the same technique we use for our coloboma eyes, where if we start
Yeah.
from the margin of the coloboma, the disc, and then we try to stop it, gently. We try to aspirate the vitreous. So I don't think any other separate technique to for the morning glory eyes.
No,
Also.
and yeah, it's like a coloboma eyes. That's what we do. Around that, go gently, yes, because retina is mobile, so there won't be much counter traction, and you have to be you have to be extremely careful, gently lift it on. Yeah, Dr. Sudhir has some suggestion and he has some points added that yes, myopic eyes, particularly having a phakic IOL, yes, we need to ensure that the globe should not collapse. Basically, you should not use too much of suction. That and if there is a mismatch between inflow and outflow, there is a risk of globe collapse and lens touching the clear crystalline lens. I mean, IOL touching the crystalline lens. So yes, those precautions obviously we need to take as the routine. Even otherwise also you do not want globe collapse because of risk of supraparietal hemorrhage and other issues. Okay. So any other question anybody has, or any consultant, any faculty would like to add on something?
So I would like to add, Shubham,
Yes, ma'am.
excellent presentation. You have done very well. Just a few points that I would like to add is that I have seen many senior residents struggle with inducing PVD. If you have the technique correct, then it's actually a easy job, and you don't have to. Most of the patient, 90% of the time, the PVD gets induced quite easily. Only a few patients in whom the PVD induction becomes difficult. So in the correct technique, what you should do is you should increase the suction. Maybe normally we keep it as 300, maybe keep it 400, or with small gauge you can go even higher, 500, 600, and keep the tip of the cutter exactly at the disc edge. And the cutter port should be facing away from the disc, not towards the disc, because the vitreous is away from the disc. So it should be away from the disc. Keep the cutter there for some time and activate the suction. You can actually see the vitreous going into the cutter port. Once you know that the vitreous is inside the cutter port, then you can lift up the cutter. Along with that, the vitreous will come. And all these maneuvers that you mentioned about using the suction or using the forceps to lift up the vitreous, all that should be done only at the disc and nowhere else. So these maneuvers should be done only at the disc, because if any kind of traction or any suction away from the disc, say towards the arcade or at the macula, can result in breaks. So you have to be very careful and probably do all these maneuvers only at the disc. And there are some cases like you have these collagen vascular disorders, Marfan's or Ehlers-Danlos, Goldman-Favre, where there are abnormal adhesions between the vitreous and the retina. So these are the cases you must anticipate that the PVD induction is going to be very difficult. So in these situations, and also coloboma, morning glory is going to be very difficult. So if you are doing a simple case, say like lensectomy or some SFIOL or ERM removal, or not ERM removal, but lensectomy, etc., where the PVD induction may not be necessary. So you may, in fact, not even attempt a PVD induction in such cases because it's going to be very difficult. So induce the PVD only if it is absolutely necessary for the case. So if you are doing an RD surgery, then probably PVD induction will be required. But otherwise, leave the vitreous in such cases because it's going to be very tough. And in the process of inducing PVD, you probably will create more breaks and it will become even worse situation. And the diabetic vitrectomy, you have shown very good videos by Dr. PV, but it's an altogether a different scenario. And the PVD induction in diabetes is not like the PVD induction what you do in rheumatogenic RD or macular hole. It's a totally a different maneuver, and it is not exactly a PVD induction, I would say. It is more of a vitreous dissection. So it's not just the traction. In fact, the PVD or the vitreous cutting in diabetic has to be more of a sharp dissection rather than any traction or pulling. So you have to be very careful while doing removing the separating the vitreous in the diabetic vitrectomies.
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am. Just I have,
Thank
yes, ma'am.
very nice presentation, good flow of the videos and your talk. I just like to add the importance of doing an ultrasound in an eye with an opaque medium, which will help you as to where to induce the PVD in a diabetic, where you should be careful. And even in a clear media now, you can do an OCT, which will help you to pick the layers of the vitreocytes. You used it very well as a description, but I think it's also important that we apply that knowledge when we assess our patients. Especially, there's a very common term said then when you see more, the more difficult it is. So, if you see a patient where you can see every single detail on the retina and you're taking that patient up for vitreous surgery, especially in a diabetic, chances are it's going to be more difficult because the vitreous is adherent and you're going to have to assess those patients much better. I think Veena Bhaskaran has a question, I think, to do with floaterectomy, a procedure which is a little bit questionable, but little controversial, though it's quite commonly performed in countries like the US and even people here. What it's important is to put it into perspective as to how handicapped is the patient by the floaters versus the risk of retinal detachment and cataract progression. So that is something that has to be discussed in detail with the patient before even considering patients for floaterectomy. Because you may induce the PVD by doing a partial vitrectomy, and during that induction, post-operatively, you can create a retinal detachment. So that's something that is always a risky proposition.
Yes, thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
Sir, like I have just one doubt when doing a PVD induction, particularly in a detached retina, because I've seen in one case like when trying to induce the PVD in with the help of a cutter elective aspiration in the peripapillary region. So the cutter probe was facing towards the fovea. That's well in the maneuver. So the fovea got stuck in that cutter probe while lifting that with PVD. So is it like that we have to face that probe towards nasal to the disc rather than temporal?
Yeah,
Detached.
I think that's an unfortunate situation, and that's why particularly when you have a mobile retina, so you do not want probe facing particularly macular area or peripapillary, not peripapillary, papillomacular bundle somewhere, because there is a risk. That
Yes.
coloboma case, what you have shown, where mobile retina with the IVT, the retina got stuck in that. So basically, try not to, as far as possible, try not to having a probe directly towards retina anywhere. But sometimes you do not have choice, because unless you rotate towards retina, you will not be able to catch the vitreous. You can put little bit sideways. You have to be very gentle, but as far as possible, avoid facing toward the fovea. Particularly, it is not necessary also, because as you rightly mentioned, your anatomy, right in the foveal area, there is no vitreous. It is along the arcade that ring is there. So maybe you can just try to target those areas to grab the vitreous. Sometimes I agree. Sometimes extremely difficult to separate the disc. So you have to go somewhere around what our last 2-3 slides you have shown. Go along that ring around the foveal area, not exactly towards the fovea, but along the arcade, you need to create a cleavage to work that way out. Dr. Shankar wants to add something?
Shubham?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just one more suggestion. If you have a funnel like RD which is standing in front of the disc and you do not want to take your microwave close to it, then forceps can be a good idea at that time to just dive inside and somewhere you will have an opaque vitreous seam. And if you start pulling also, one part of the vitreous PVD will get induced. So in the cases where you think the fovea and everything is coming close around the disc and you don't want to insert active suction, then you can go and try with the forceps. Many times once we catch a retina and the nitrogenic break occurs, then we discard the vitreous cutter and take the forceps. But instead in this kind of situation, if you directly go with the forceps, it will always help. At least it will not catch the fovea or the retina close to the posterior bone.
Thank you. Sure.
Shubham, a very nice presentation. And
Thank you, ma'am.
just few things what you are talking about fovea, because it's the thinnest area of the retina.
Yes, ma'am.
Any further traction can cause a hole, and especially if you are dealing with a vitreomacular traction, this can happen if you're trying to induce it temporally from the disc. So best is to go nasally, and if you want, you can even use a bimanual technique to separate it from the area of temporal part of the disc. Bimanual dissection is again a very good technique in diabetics and even in pediatric cases sometimes to induce PVD. Once you separate it from the disc, you can just keep separating bimanually and go up to the periphery. Again, patients with Stickler, Goldman-Pavey, FEVR, these are having abnormal adhesion, so it might be difficult. So aim is to do as much as vitrectomy as possible in patients with retinal detachment, and otherwise also once you are entering and doing a vitrectomy, as much easily you are able to, and your aim should be PVD induction. But in difficult cases, if you see broad posterior vitreous base, you can stop there, identify that. Then once you have breaks, horseshoe tears, lattices, breaks, actually you should clear all the traction. So even the anterior margin of the break should be cleared of vitreous. Otherwise, later on, there will be a pull on that area, and again a recurrent detachment may happen. Lattices, if there are posterior lattices, you can sometimes go anterior to that lattice and still cut the vitreous. So try to do that as well.
Yes, ma'am.
And always remember the complications if you are leaving a lot of vitreous behind. So patients with macular hole where you are, this is a vision enhancing surgery. SFIOL is a vision enhancing surgery. And these patients actually have a higher rate of retinal detachment in the hands of anterior segment surgeons. So that's why posterior segment surgeons are doing that. We are able to do more complete vitrectomy.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
I
you.
think, yeah, it's a very, like a Shubham, excellent presentation, but obviously, yes, there are wide spectrum, everything we cannot cover, there are a lot of practical difficulties will be there, and you have to take a call on case-to-case basis. So every case is different. So we few representative videos we could see show there are few, we did not have certain representative video cases, but try to cover as much as possible. But just the take home message is every case is different, and you have to assess accordingly and plan surgical technique in that particular case. I think we'll stop now. Okay, and thank you very much for everybody being here. And again, Shubham, once again, congratulations and
Thank you,
very
sir.
well done. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Shubham. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shubham.
Thank you, sir.